Welcome to the tutorial for the Seaford Skirt. I'm going to start by prepping the pockets. So here we go, I've got my rectangle of fabric for my pocket. That's the right side. You can see I've got my notches where my fold line's going to be for the top. This is the wrong side. I've stuck some interfacing on the top, just between that notch, that fold notch and the edge. I'm going to fold that over onto the wrong side, give it a press, and I'm also going to fold back this centimetre seam allowance onto the wrong side as well. So that's what it should look like when it's pressed. There we go. So wrong side, 1 centimetre, and then fold over at those nips. And there we go. We're going to stitch on this edge now, just to secure the top edge. There we are. Give it a nice press. That's the top edge finished. Next, I'm going to fold over the remaining seam allowance on these 3 edges, which is 1 centimetre, and press it down. That's the right side. This is the wrong side. We've got our seam allowance pressed over. So now we're going to attach the pockets onto the front skirt panels. So here we go. I've used really contrasting fabrics, hopefully to make it easier for you. There we go. Look, I've used a pencil to make a cross, plus I've popped a pin in to try and make it so that you can see, although the pattern's so busy it's hard. So I'm just going to marry up the corners of the pockets with those points that I've traced from my pattern piece. That's the top 2. That should not lie flat so that you can get your hand in there. It's a nice little feature. And then I'm going to match those points as well at the bottom. This bit lies flat at the bottom. So I'm going to start stitching from here and go down, pivot at the corner, across the bottom, pivot again, and go straight from the corner up to the top edge. You might want to pop some more pins in or tack it on. It's entirely up to you. I'm just going to go for it. So back tack to start, or you can do your fancy little triangles at the top and all the way down to that first corner. Needle in, foot up and pivot, and then foot down, and off you go again. I'm stitching really close to the edge here. Needle down, foot up, pivot your fabric, and down, and off you go again. Back tack to finish. There we go. So you can see now there's a nice space to put your hand in, and it stands away nicely at the top, but it's nice and flat at the bottom. There we go. Look, you can see just how much it stands away there. So now we're going to join our front panels with the pockets on down the centre front seam. The centre front is the edge with just the 1 notch. That's the centre front or the centre back. The side seam has a notch nearer the waist as well as the other notch. So it's got 2, the top one being a zip guide for where the bottom of your zip will come. So pinning together, you're going to stitch 1 centimetre seam allowance as always from the edge down this centre front and zigzag or overlock the finished edge. There we go. Then I'm just going to press it to one side. This is such a light fabric, I don't need to press this open, so hence overlocking them together. Give it a nice press, and there you go, you've got your front. So you just need to do the same process for the back, remembering that the double notch is the side seam. So next we pop the yokes on. I've got 2 sets here, 2 pairs. That is my outer yoke. There's no interfacing on that, so it's just fabric. These are my inner yokes, which have been interfaced, so they have a little bit more structure to them. I'm going to set those ones aside, but you can see I've marked the halfway of the yoke just by folding it in half and popping a little mark there, and I've also marked this notch and these side ones on all the yokes. So this is the uninterfaced pair now. I'm taking one of them and I'm going to find that halfway point. That's my seam on my skirt, so that's halfway on my skirt section. And then on my yoke there should be the little notch that I put in there, little snip. Let's see, I can't see it, the fabric's too busy. There it is. So I'm going to match that notch to that seam. There we go. So right sides together, matching that middle notch as well. And the ends, make sure they meet, and then do the same the other side. Mark that middle one with a pin and the ends together. So you might want to put in a few more pins than I have in between. That's lovely. So we're going to stitch centimetre seam allowance again all along. There we go, all stitched. Fits nice and neatly. And you can see the seam allowance there is still raw, but I'm going to press it up towards the yoke so that it's all pointing towards the waistline. That looks better, nicely pressed. Show you the other side. There you go. So now we're going to insert the zip. Here's my front again. I've overlocked the side seams already, just so that they're neatened for the zip insertion. Also, you can see I've rolled out the coils on this zip and pressed them, which makes the zip lie a little bit funny, but it just means that it's easier to get in a bit with the zip foot when you're stitching it in. You can get a bit closer. So I'm going to lay my zip right side up next to my front, which is right side up. Then I'm going to flip my zip over so that the edge of the tape, that little stopper needs to be a centimetre away from the raw edge at the top, and the edge of the tape needs to meet the side seam, that neatened edge that we've overlooked or zigzagged already. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in because I'm just going to stitch right on the edge of this now, just because I find this is better than trying to use lots of pins when you're putting zips in. So this way it just holds it still while I try and get as close as I can to the coil when I'm stitching the zip later. So we're just going to whiz down the edge of that tape, attaching it to the side seam of the skirt. It doesn't matter if you can't get all the way down. There we go. So we've got one stitch line there, so it's not anywhere near the zip yet. Now I've got my back panel. I'm going to lay it right sides up again next to my front, do my zip up. So I've got, I'm going to flip that over now, right sides together. So I've got the right sides of my skirt together and the right side of my zip up underneath my skirt back. And again, we want to start with that little stopper at the top of the zip being a centimetre down from the waistline. And I'm going to stitch that right on the edge of the tape and the edge of the side seam there. So just down that edge there. Again, it's just to hold it together while I get this next bit done. Okay, so arrange everything how it should be. Everything the right way round so that you've got the right sides facing you. Check that your seams on your yoke match or meet or as near as damn it. If you're happy with that, then we can go on and roll this coil over and stitch as close as you can to it and go as far as you can with your zip foot. If you can get past your zip a bit That's great. This foot is quite cumbersome on this machine, unfortunately, so it's a bit tricky to get it past the actual zip. But anyway, just go down as far as you can and stitch in as close as you can. Don't worry if it's not too close on the first pass, you can always go back and do it again. So there you go, you can see there's 2 rows of stitching quite clearly there. I've used really bright thread. I'm going to do the same on this side now. So there you go, that's the basics of the zip in. Let's just do it up, make sure it's not too close. No, that's okay, it still works beautifully. I could probably get a bit closer in at the bottom there. Okay, let's now just put this together. So match the side seams, push your zip out of the way, feel for that stopper that's at the bottom of the zip, start there, back tack and work all the way down to the hem. So centimetre seam allowance again, making sure that bottom of the zip is out of the way so you don't catch it in your seam. And off we go. So there you go, you can see I've started there back with a back tack and worked all the way down. I'm going to press this seam open now. That's it, that's the zip in. Let's have a look at the other side. Yeah, I can get a little bit closer in there. I think I will just go back, open it up and just do that last little bit again and get in a bit closer. But basically that zip is in. So now all that's left is to do the other side seam. So I'm going to match the bottom seams of the yokes, make sure they're in line, pop a pin in there. And then you want to stitch starting from the waist all the way down, again a centimetre seam allowance, all the way down to the hem. There we go. We'll open that up and give it a press. Lovely, that's looking nice. That you can see as well the yokes match. So we're done with the outside of the skirt. Now we're going to do the inner yokes. So this is my interfaced pair of yokes here. So they've got a little bit more stiffness to them. I've marked those centre points again, side notches and the bottom ones as well. And I'm going to stitch down one side. Doesn't matter which side, they're both the same. So just one side seam. There we are, centimetre seam allowance. We're going to press that open. There we go. So that's the prep. Now we need our skirt back. Undo that zip. And we're going to lay right sides together, the inner yoke on top of the outer yoke. But we're going to leave a centimetre seam allowance free there for the moment. So start off pinning a centimetre in and then match your side seam at the waist. Match that little snip there that's in the middle. And again, you can pop more or less pins in depending on your preference. So the other side again, we're going to just overshoot that with a centimetre seam allowance there, which we will fold back when we start stitching. And find our centre notches again and give it a pin. Okay, so stitch in a centimetre seam allowance from the top of the waist, fold back that little centimetre that was flapping backwards before you start sewing. I'll show you again when I've done it to make it more clear. Stitch right the way around the waist until you get to the other end and the other side of the zip. And again, fold that little centimetre seam allowance back underneath. So this is what it will look like. There you go. You've got your centimetre folded back so that when you fold your yoke back over, that seam allowance will tuck in and be really nice and neat and out of the way of the coil of the zip. So I'm now going to just snip into my seam allowance every 2 or 3 centimetres. If you're using a very thick fabric, you might want to grade this seam as well, which means just trimming down the yoke side of the fabric to half so that on the seam allowance so that you don't get it too bulky. But I'm just doing little snips and I'm going to press that seam allowance up towards the yoke again. And then stitch on the edge. So I've pressed it all and I'm now understitching or stitching right on the edge, stitching through all the layers of the inner yoke and all the seam allowance right next to that waist seam. There we go, you can see the 2 rows of stitching quite close together, and this just means that when you fold it and give it a little press, it forms a really lovely edge around the top. So there we go, you can see it's nice and crisp around that waistline. Okay, so next job is to secure this inner yoke. I've pressed my seam allowance back, so that's a centimetre around the remaining edges, and I'm just going to pin it now to the zip and then around the bottom edge of the yoke so that I can pop a little hand stitch in there. You can always use your machine to top stitch it if you wanted to, but I prefer this. So pinning all around the bottom edge, make sure your seams match at the side. And then when you've done that all the way around, you're going to thread up a needle and do a little bit of hand stitching. So here we go, this is just me doing a little bit of the hand stitching. This is how I do it. I pick up a thread from that seam and then take a little bit of the lower yoke that I've pressed back, and then I go back into another stitch from that seam and just keep working around till I've finished securing it all down. You can just take a little thread from the fabric if you prefer, but the stitching's there, so why not use it? Okay, so just finish that off. There we go, all hand stitched down. It's nice and secure. So the last thing to do is the hem facing. This is of course optional, as are the pockets, but I think it adds a certain sort of finish which is rather nice. So I've got 2 pairs of these facings cut, and I'm going to just stitch the short edges together, making sure they're all the correct way round. That's it, keep them the same way up. And do that centimetre seam allowance to join them all together. Careful you don't get any twists in it anywhere. There we go. So I'm going to open all these seams and give them a press. Make sure you've got no twists and turns, make sure it's like a smile. All the curves should be going the same way. So there we go, it's all pressed. And now I'm going to press the top edge. So again, lay it out so you've got a smile, and it's the top part of the smile that you want to fold over 1 centimetre and press. So it's the shorter edge, the inner part of the sort of curve, I suppose, concave part rather than the convex part. Great, so we've pre-pressed that bit. Now we're going to find our hem and our facing, and we need to make sure we've got seams. There we go. So we want to match those. That way the curves will all match because they're all the same. So seam to seam, right sides together, pop some pins in, match all the seams first. Again, it helps you make sure you haven't got any twists and turns in it, and then just pin all the way around the outside edge. Centimetre seam allowance, we're going to stitch all the way around the hem. So I've stitched around mine. You can see I've already started to clip the seam allowance. So you basically want to just snip in every 4 centimetres or so, every couple of inches, just to help it curve nicely. And then you're going to press that seam allowance up towards the facing again. So up towards that bit. Give it a nice press. This will really help when you stitch it down so that you don't miss any bits of that clipped seam. So that's nicely pressed. I'm going to press stitch on the edge there. So stitching on the edge of the seam, the right hand side of my seam here. So I'm stitching the facing to the seam allowance underneath. All the seam allowance is pointing towards the facing underneath. So give that a stitch all the way around. Again, very worth doing because it gives it a lovely crisp edge. There we go. Then I'm just going to fold that in again, roll that edge over and give it a nice press again. Okay, we're nearly there. So we've got this lovely pre-prepped folded edge. Again, pop loads of pins in and just whiz around that inside edge as close as you can to secure the facing. Here we go. Beautiful. Just needs one last press. As you can see, it gives it a really lovely finish on the edge there. So that's your skirt. It should look something like this. Enjoy.